Welcome back. It's Wednesday, and we are back at the Women's Lounge where we are talking about the Epstein files. What are they? What's been released, and what justice would look like for survivors? So I'm going to let everybody know there's a content warning. This episode talks about sexual abuse, sex trafficking, exploitation of minors, violence against women. So just preemptively, just so you know, the Epstein files, what is it? It is about abuse of young girls. It is about violence against women. So in this episode of the Women's Lounge, we break down what people mean when they say the Epstein files, what's actually in those records and what isn't, and what has been publicly released so far. So including newly released photos from the Epstein's estate, what justice can realistically look like for survivors who were girls, young women at the time. So what are they? So let's get into it. So the Epstein files is what is a catch-all term used for records that were tied to the investigation and the cases involving Jeffrey Epstein and his associates. So the files include things like court filings, both civil and criminal, and related exhibits, flight log records, travel records, contact books, sometimes they're called black books, and other directories. What may also be included are search warrants, financial records. As we know, Jeffrey Epstein was a financier, more like a pedophile, but he was a pedophile, but everyone talked about he was a financier. So the records can include search warrants, financial records, interview notes, and any seized digital data, including phones, computers, grand jury materials. Historically, grand jury materials have been sealed. Sometimes some of them were later unsealed, and they were controlled in limited ways. For example, to redact to protect people's identities. So there's redactions in them. So people online often talk about a single client list, like there's this big list, right? It isn't. The public reporting around the latest court-ordered release emphasizes and talks about the large body of investigative material. So it isn't this neat file of it's in one book and all the names and all the information is in there. It is more about material that they have found along the way. And if we remember, when the initial arrest of Jeffrey Epstein in Florida, Pam Bondi was the attorney general there. So we are talking about different files, whether it's things in the computer, things on their cell phones, logs, travel logs. There isn't a single big report on all the names. All right. So who's in them? Two things can be true at once. So a lot of powerful names show up across contacts, calendar, photos, travel records, you name it. So just because a name appears on it, it doesn't automatically mean wrongdoing. So I want to preemptively say that. It doesn't mean that there was wrongdoing. So sometimes it's mentioned, sometimes they're pictured along with him, sometimes it's contact information, and sometimes it's tied to allegations. None of those are the same. Those are not the same. So the names that have been publicly reported as appearing in recently released Epstein estate photos, the House Oversight Committee, mostly Democrats, released a small batch of images from a much larger trove received by the Epstein's estate. So the public reporting says that the released photos depict, among others, the current president, Donald Trump, Bill Clinton, and Prince Andrew, which, as we know, was stripped of his title in England. There are also images of additional public figures such as Steve Madden, such as Bill Gates, Richard Branson, Woody Allen, Alan Dershowitz, and I know in some emails also Larry Summers. So the context varies and definitely denials exist. And again, the appearance. So the appearance of Some of these folks being in files, photos, emails, whatnot, or contacts does not equal proof of a crime. I want to make sure I say that. It does not equal proof of a crime. So the names in previously unsealed court documents, earlier unsealed records, including documents tied to Maxwell's related civil litigation record, are also mentioned. There are mentions of prominent figures reporting at the time emphasize that some were in passing and not accusations on these people, and that's from The Guardian. So some of the mentions they're saying are just people they happen to be part of, maybe a party, maybe they were BCC'd in an email. According to The Guardian, not all of it is an accusation for everybody. So what photos have been released? So when we talk about photos, the recently reported releases include a set of photos from the Epstein's estate released publicly by the House Oversight Committee. So a limited selection from larger collection. So they've released some of the photos. What we do know is that some of the faces of the women were redacted from the photos, according to the Associated Press News. So names were redacted for women to protect their identity. Their faces were also redacted. So the ongoing reporting notes that there are large volumes of images that exist in the broader estate. In the Department of Justice universe, what the public has seen is what they're saying is a small slice with a lot of redactions, but more are expected to come out this upcoming Friday. And of course, they will still continue to protect victims and their privacy, even at the next release. So what's happening now with the releases and unsealing? So as of today, mid-December, it's Wednesday, December 17th, the major reporting describes judges ordering the release and unsealing of investigative grand jury related materials connected to Epstein or Maxwell, I'm sorry, alongside a congressional push and deadlines for the Department of Justice disclosures, while also warning the public not to expect a single bombshell list. So again, there's not one little neat list with all of this, right? But also I think when we talk about how creepy it sounds of a client list, right? Why are they clients? Clients of what? So he was a financier, but a lot of the folks in his picture, a lot of the folks on these notes, can they be traced back to financial things with him? I'm not sure. I'd love to see that. So what were their clients of, first of all? So we're emphasizing with all of this is the protection for victims. So we want to, I hope that they redact enough information so that victims are not re-victimized, so that the women that are in these files who may have been girls at the time and probably were are not re-victimized. So I'm hoping that happens. So the victims, girls and young women at the time, we're hoping they get justice. Will they get justice? I also want to really talk through about the way we talk about girls. And at times when we call them young women, no, they are girls. We don't call boys young men. No, they are boys. So I want to make sure that we don't soften language around what is a minor. A minor is a minor. It is a girl. It is a boy. And softening language for pedophiles to call it young women, to call it young boys, softens what has happened to them. So I'm hoping that justice is served, and it's not just one thing. So in Epstein's case, there's so many pieces. I mean, you're talking about uneven pieces. We're talking about criminal accountability. There's limited criminal accountability, but real in parts. We know Jeffrey Epstein died in custody before trial, so he died in custody. We know Ghislaine Maxwell was convicted and is serving prison sentence. So her serving prison sentence is one of the most concrete criminal outcomes tied to his trafficking. And so we know that this is real, that this happened. Why? Because we have a woman in Ghislaine in prison serving a prison sentence because we know that this happened. So when we talk about believing survivors, we've got to believe that this happened to them. We also have someone in prison because she was convicted of trafficking. And then we're talking about civil accountability. Um, we're hoping and we know survivors will have more traction around this, around civil accountability. Survivors have pursued civil lawsuits and settlements connected to institutions that enabled or allegedly enabled and failed to stop Epstein, some resulting in large settlements, and details vary by case. So we do know that there have been some settlements around this, but we're also looking into truth and transparency, right? Often painful, but definitely necessary. So the broader disclosures can help map networks of people that enabled, who was helping enable this, who was helping recruitment, right? But also the institutional failure. That's what we know must be handled with survivor safety at the center. When we talk about privacy redactions, trauma informed reporting, we want to make sure that there's accountability, but we also want to make sure that, again, the survivors are not re-victimized. So a lot, yeah, yeah. One of the better pieces is on the Washington Post around redactions, around trauma-informed reporting. So what we want to talk about really is for the many survivors that have won pieces of justice, especially through Maxwell's conviction and civil outcomes. But the question remains around full accountability. The question remains around accountability for the men that were part of this, the men that enabled, that ignored, and or profited from all of this. All of that is something that doesn't sit well with us. So we've got Jeffrey Epstein, who is long gone, is dead, who committed suicide according to reports. And then we've got Maxwell, who's in prison. So who is going to be held accountable, right? So that's still to be known. My big question is, what did these people know, right? Let's just say someone says, well, I was just in a photo, I attended a party. Really, some of those photos have some really, really young women around. No one asked questions. Also, what did the president as some of the photos were just awful. I mean, at one point there's the president of the United States, Donald Trump, with in one of the photos, yuck, with selling condoms for $4.50 with his face on it that says, I'm huge. So what did he know? Right? What did he know? What was he partaking in? What was he part of? And if they knew why, let's just say they didn't know. Let's say I didn't know this was happening. At some point you did know, and they continued associating with him. At some point you see who is around him, what he is doing. Some of the photos had so much stuff in it that it's hard to ignore that you didn't know, right? And so then when you did know, let's just say you got an inkling, you got a feeling that Jeffrey Epstein wasn't, as clean as he made it out to be. What point did you know, and why did they continue associating with the known pedophile? There are also emails, right? After he was convicted, where these folks continued to engage with him, even Deepak Chopra. Deepak Chopra is in emails after a lot of this stuff has gone on. And why? Why continue to associate with the known pedophile? And I guess that is a question that may never be answered. But the other realistic part is he was known as what? What was his profession? He's a financier. Okay, what did he do? Why were so many prominent folks around him in his emails and photos at parties? What did he bring to the table, and what were these folks partaking in? That's the big question. And I think we all know the answer. I do think that there were enough folks that enabled him, that enabled the behavior, but that also made sure that some of the victims were silenced. So I do think that there are enough people out there that knew and that partook in some of this stuff, or were quiet and did not say anything about what was happening, and they knew it was happening. And that's even a bigger issue, right? What's our responsibility around people that are nefarious like that? We should be calling it out like, hey, we're not hanging out with you. No, we're not going to your party. No, we're not taking photos. These people look to be minors, right? These young girls look to be minors. Are they adults? So I do think that there's a responsibility around that no one is talking about. For those folks that are saying, I didn't know, and I didn't know he was doing any of this. You are in pictures with minors in scantily clad outfits, minors. As an adult, there is no reason for you to be around that without understanding that you are guilty too, guilty by association and guilty by silence. So I'm going to say that. I'm going to bring it into the rally point. Whew, it's a lot. It's a lot. And supposedly more files are coming out this Friday. So let's see what happens here. So I'm at the rally point and the call to action, and we got to make sure that it is survivor centered. We've got to demand transparency with survivor protections. And it means redactions. It means trauma informed handling. I'm going to ask everyone to support organizations that provide legal aid, counseling, and survivor services in your community. So I'm going to ask folks to support organizations, support women, believe women, but also push your elected officials for policies that strengthen protections for minors, that extend the statute of limitations where appropriate, and to fund trafficking prevention and survivor services. Don't let them get away with it. Don't let them get away with this is it. He's dead. Giselle's in prison. Don't let them get away with possibly the president pardoning Maxwell. Don't let them get away with I didn't know. You did know. At some point, you did know. We want to make sure that we continue pushing for the files. I know that some of these folks that were in the files, in the current, what has been released, have kind of stepped away from the spotlight. We've got to continue calling it out. We've got to continue asking, what were you doing there? Okay, you may not be in the travel logs, but you continuously attended parties even after he was convicted, right? So I do think we've got to call it out in order for the survivors to see justice, in order for the survivors to understand that justice means holding these men accountable. All right. I'm Emiliana. I am your host at the Women's Lounge. It's Wednesday. If you like this episode, I want you to hit subscribe. I want you to hit share. I want you to send me your questions. Yes. Podcast at womensmarchfoundation.org is where I can answer your questions. Today, I did not answer any questions as we were just talking about what is in the files, what could be in the files. So next week, I will answer some of the questions around the Epstein files. Keep them coming. Share. And I will see you next week. I'm your host, Emiliana Guareca at the Women's Lounge. See you soon.